His tireless fight for justice and democracy continues to inspire millions. His widow, Yulia Navalnaya, is with us today, carrying forward his legacy and commitment. We also recognize the bravery and sacrifice of Vladimir Kara-Murza and Ilya Yashin, both of whom endured unjust, lengthy imprisonment under baseless charges and immense personal suffering for envisioning a peaceful, democratic Russia. The European Union must intensify its support for these pro-democratic forces who fight daily at immense personal risk. With that in mind, and without further ado, let me now give the floor to the chair of the Subcommittee on Human Rights, Mr. Munir Saturi, for your statement, please.
Merci, chers collègues. C'est avec vous.
Thank you. It is with a lot of emotion and admiration that I'm taking the floor before our guests. I admire your courage, your fight. I'm very grateful because by fighting ceaselessly for democracy and human rights, you're fighting against authoritarianism, the arbitrary regime of Vladimir Putin, and you're also fighting for our freedom and the safety of the European continent. In our Subcommittee for Human Rights, we pay particular attention to the issue of human rights, and particularly in the territories which have been illegally and brutally occupied by Ukraine. The situation is so dismal that in order to support the independent media, the defenders of human rights and the pro-democratic forces, it is sometimes very hard to find ways and means to bring pressure to bear. Now, there is help being given. Sanctions are being taken against those who are violating human rights and who are opposing democracy. We are trying to ensure that any type of torture or violation of human rights be documented and that justice be implemented, including the justice of the International Criminal Court. But we see that the situation is only getting worse. Madam Navalnaya, when you spoke to this parliament just a few days after the dreadful assassination of your husband, you said that in order to help us stop being boring, innovate, and take Alexei by way of example, I'm sure that you will help us today, and you will be able to help us work towards a democratic, peaceful Russia, a Russia which will respect human rights and freedoms. You and Mr. Kara-Murza and Mr. Yashin.
Ville Niinistö, Chair of our Parliament's delegation to the European Union-Russia Parliamentary Cooperation Committee. Please, Ville.
Thank you, Mr. Vaid, and thank you, Mr. Saturi, and the whole AFET committee and RUA subcommittee for agreeing to this joint meeting with our guests. And we, from the delegation side, are happy that Ms. Navalnaya, Mr. Kara-Murza, and Mr. Yashin have accepted our invitation. We in the delegation deemed it crucial for the Parliament to hear your personal testimony on the severely deteriorated situation of human rights in Russia under Putin, which you have experienced at the cost of immense personal sacrifices and suffering. We are aware that your endeavour to stand up for peace, democracy, freedom, and the most basic human rights in today's Russia is as essential as it is also personally perilous. It is with profound alarm that we witnessed accelerating and systemic repression faced by dissenting voices and anti-war critics who are being systematically persecuted and silenced by Putin's regime. You, more than anyone, have experienced how independent thought and truth-telling in Russia have been systematically criminalized, leading to the harshest prison regimes and in some cases to a death sentence. This not only underscores your bravery, but also the urgent need for the EU to continue supporting Russian pro-democratic forces more than ever. So it is timely that we have this event today as well. This is all the more important given the new big geopolitical context, marked by the discontinuation of US aid funding and also possible discussions of US relations with Russia being normalized. Despite the atrocities committed by Russia in its ongoing war of aggression against Ukraine, despite war crimes that need to be taken to the courts, and despite the ICC's arrest warrants on Russia's current leaders. The Parliament and the EU as a whole believes that peace cannot come at the cost of justice. A just and lasting peace in Ukraine can only be achieved if the perpetrators of war crimes are brought to justice, and ultimately Russia's transition towards a democratic state where the rule of law prevails will be the best guarantee of peace and security on the European continent. On this, it's important that we can have this dialogue. Ms. Navalnaya, your late husband Alexei Navalny, was awarded the European Parliament Sakharov Prize for freedom of thought in 2021. By continuing his work and publishing in posthumous memoirs, you keep Alexei's legacy alive in the hearts of all who dream of a free Russia, and you continue to inspire millions. I would like to express my deepest respect for your resilience and commitment to what he called the beautiful Russia of the future. Mr. Kara-Murza, your decades of activism both in Russia and abroad have come at the expense of several poisoning attempts and the longest jail sentence an opposition figure has received in modern Russia. You spent over 2 years in one of the harshest Siberian penal colonies, including 11 months in solitary confinement. And yet your unwavering fight for a democratic Russia remains unbroken. My respect to you, your bravery and the strength of your convictions. And Mr. Yashin, your political commitment and truth-telling about Russia's atrocities in Bucha led to a severe prison sentence for which you served 25 months in very harsh conditions. Today, you continue to speak out for a Russia free of violence and dictatorship, a commitment which deserves, again, our full-hearted support, respect and solidarity. I would like to thank you all for your presence and for the exemplary bravery that you embody, and we are here from the Parliament side today to listen to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Niinistö. And now we proceed with our distinguished speakers, and we start with Yulia Navalnaya. Please, floor is yours.
Dear members of the Parliament, members of the Droit and Subcommittee on Human Rights, and AFET members, thank you very much for giving me the floor together with my colleagues. I'll be honest and frank. I think this kind of dialogue should have started long ago, but it's better late than never, as they say. Together with Vladimir and Ilya, we'll be brave and we'll speak on behalf of those who believe that Russia could be a European country similar to what your countries are. And I believe that our interests are the same, because stable, safe, and prosperous Europe won't be possible without a free, democratic, and rich Russia. If you want to understand it, just have a look at the map, please. What is an obstacle for Russia like this? It's just one man. It's Vladimir Putin. He's been in power for 25 years. 25 years he's been suppressing human rights and freedoms in our country. He puts in prison, he tortures, he kills his political opponents. He launches aggressive wars. He invades neighboring countries. He does saber rattling and threatens the world with nuclear war, and he commits horrible crimes, and he goes scot-free. How come that in 25 years no one has been able to put an end to his activities? Why have we failed? Why have you failed? I think this is because we haven't joined our efforts yet. It's easier said than done, because we have major obstacles in front of us and objectives are really a tall order. But I think we really need to start working together. We should launch small but significant projects. Today we'll hear a lot of good words about how important it is to support civil society in Russia, how important it is to maintain dialogue between Europe and those Russians who are against the war. I totally agree with the statements, but let's go from words to deeds. Let's do something practical and let's be operational, so that it's not just a declaration which becomes the outcome of our meeting or a resolution. And here I would like to share some ideas with you. First, 10 months ago, there was an unprecedented exchange of prisoners between Russia and the West. That had been prepared for a long time. That had been paid by a lot of people. And I know personally what I'm talking about. But still, we managed to save 16 innocent victims from Putin's gulag. And 2 of them will take the floor after me. Ilya and Vladimir, they are very modest. They won't be speaking about themselves. That's why I will be speaking about them to you. They immediately started working upon release. And over the last 12 months, they managed to do a lot for anti-Putin and anti-war resistance. We are very grateful to those who were involved in this exchange and who helped to save them. The leading part was done by the previous US administration. The new US administration has different priorities. It is sad, but it's their right after all. So what shall we do? We should just be idle? No, I don't think this would be a right approach. We need to fill this vacuum. And here we have a wonderful opportunity for Europe to show, indeed, that it is committed to humanitarian values, to show that it can be a leader, to show that Europe can be saving political prisoners from Putin's and Lukashenko's regime, and also political prisoners from Russia. They can start a real political campaign so that the names of political prisoners are always raised at different platforms. There are a lot of people and their number is increasing. We should really do in such a way that no deal with the Putin's regime could be addressed without mentioning the political prisoners. There is enough leverage and strength on part of Europe. Secondly, millions of Russians are against Putin and against the war, and they will become the engine for change when the time comes. So I think you who are here in this room will understand me very well. 12 out of 27 EU members, at least half, almost half of them, recently, relatively recently, were behind the Iron Curtain. 40 years ago, in no Eastern European countries, there were no street protests against communist regimes. 35 years ago, in the squares in Prague, Vilnius, Bucharest, Moscow, and Kiev, there were shoulder to shoulder millions of people. And they were the people who managed to overthrow the communist dictatorship. But where did they come from? They didn't come here from the moon. They were the same people who were back in 1985. In 1990, they took to the streets and they took the power. I'm sure that something like this will happen again in Russia. And we know for a fact that there are people like this. We are in touch with them. We speak here on their behalf. We know that it's really hard for them right now because they are against a humongous machine of repression. Even one word can result in imprisonment. But in Europe, for some reason, they blame them for what Putin and his regime have been doing. But this is not so. These people are victims of the regime and not those who support the regime. They are our linchpin. And together we'll be working on building new, democratic and free Russia. No one will come to save us from the moon, and no one will build a free Russia for us, which means that now we need to support these people so that we could work together at a later stage. How can you support them? Well, at least you can help them to preserve themselves, to maintain this pressure that has been exerted vis-à-vis them by the Putin regime, to maintain connections with them, to help them, to show the prospects for them, to use any opportunity so that they could feel this support. They are not alone. That's what they need to feel. But what I read in the news, the EU has decided to allocate 5.5 million euros to support Radio Free Europe. This is an American media corporation that writes about Russia. But there are a lot of wonderful Russian media who for 3.5 years who have been working in exile. They work against the resistance by the Russian authorities and still maintain and even increase their subscribers within the country. They talk, they address millions of Russians over the millions of different barriers. They tell the truth about Putin's regime, and they together are just surviving. And for each of them, it is really important. Any penny counts. But how come the EU decides to support an US-based and supported media, but not Russian-based media? I think this is just due to the lack of a dialogue. If you just asked me or Ilya or Vladimir, any of us would give you names of some important Russian media who really need your support right now. And this is not just about media. There are human rights defenders, lawyers. There are civil projects that bring together people, even under current circumstances. There are technological initiatives related to the spread of VPN. I can go on and on. But to support projects like this would help ordinary Russians. And we are here representing them. And they won't forget this. In conclusion, I would like to note that it's a must, that we are not shy, we don't shy away from hard work. We're ready to go for a long time. We're ready to run a marathon. When we say that we are ready to fight Putin until we win, it's not just a figure of speech. He stole a country from us. We don't have any other country. And he also stole my family. I will never forget it. And that's why I will continue my fight for as long as it takes. And I will never give up. And I really hope that for many of you, these are not just beautiful words, and that you will support, really support us in our fight. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Yulia Navalnaya. And now the floor goes to Mr. Vladimir Kara-Murza. Please, floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Payet, Mr. Satory, Mr. Niinistö, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed members of the European Parliament. Before I say anything else, I want to thank you, of course, for holding this important meeting and for your gracious invitation, but first and foremost, for your solidarity during the time of my imprisonment. I very clearly remember the day in the autumn of 2022 when, along with a regular stack of letters, the prison censor brought me a large yellow envelope with a Belgian postal seal. Of course, it had already been opened. All the prison correspondence is monitored and censored and read by the authorities. And inside that envelope was a very kind letter from a long list of members of the European Parliament, including several whom I see in this room today. I cannot tell you how much it meant to receive that message of hope from the free world, how important it was to know that political prisoners in Russia are not forgotten. The prisoner exchange last August saved 16 of us from the hell of Putin's gulag, but so many remain behind. According to Memorial, Russia's most respected human rights organization, there are more than 3,000 political prisoners in today's Russia, more than there were in the whole of the Soviet Union in the mid-1980s. And the fastest growing category on this list are people who have protested against the war in Ukraine. For many of them, it is not only a question of unjust and politically motivated imprisonment, it is also very literally a question of life or death. As it is, for example, for Alexei Gorinov, a Moscow municipal deputy who had asked for a minute of silence at his district council meeting in memory of the victims of Russia's war in Ukraine, and who is now in a prison hospital in Siberia with tuberculosis on his way to a strict regime penal colony because of it. People like Gorinov represent the best of Russia, the best hope for our future, and we cannot allow Putin's dictatorship to extinguish their voices. Vladimir Putin wants the whole world to think that he is Russia, that all Russians support his regime, that all Russians back his war. His propaganda machine continuously hammers this message. As supposed proof, they point to so-called elections in which real opposition candidates can never participate, and to so-called opinion polls where respondents know that giving the wrong answer can land them in prison, as it did with Yuri Kakhovets, a Muscovite who received 5 years in a penal colony for telling a pollster on the street what he thought about this war. To this day, too many people in the West fall for this Kremlin narrative. But actions always speak louder than words, and the ever-growing spiral of repression in Russia tells a very different story. The thousands who are imprisoned, the thousands more who faced administrative charges, the tens of thousands detained by police for anti-war protests across Russia, these are the faces of a different Russia. The Russia Vladimir Putin does not want you to see. Not the Russia of murderers and war criminals in the Kremlin, but the Russia of decent and courageous people who oppose them. And it's not only about the people who are imprisoned. However difficult or impossible it is to judge the state of public opinion in a dictatorship, we do from time to time get what I like to call glimpses into how a lot of people in Russia actually feel about Putin and about his war. One such glimpse came last year when, amid the staged circus of our so-called presidential election, one candidate, a lawyer, a former member of parliament named Boris Nadezhdin, decided to run on an anti-war platform. The public response was incredible. Suddenly, all across Russia, in large cities and small towns, long lines formed at Nadezhdin's campaign offices, lines of people waiting to sign the nomination petitions to get him on the ballot. In 3 weeks, he had almost 250,000 signatures with no money, with no media access, with no administrative support. Of course, he was barred from running, needless to say, as opposition candidates in Putin's Russia invariably are. But that was almost besides the point, because the carefully constructed propaganda image of universal public support for the war in Russia collapsed in a matter of days. I'll never forget the letter one young woman wrote me in prison from the Black Sea coast town of Novorossiysk. After describing how she waited for several hours in a long line of like-minded people to sign the nomination papers for the anti-war candidate, she wrote, "I never realized how many of us there are." I'm grateful to the European Parliament for focusing on this issue of cooperation between the EU and Russia's democratic forces, because too often, when it comes to Western discourse on Russia, we hear two polar opposite narratives, one just as unacceptable as the other. The first is a narrative coming from capitals like Washington or Budapest. Let's just reset and normalize our relations with Putin. Let's make concessions to him. Let's go back to business as usual. But Europe learned the hard way in the 1930s what happens when you try to appease an aggressor. And I hope that every Western politician who wants to once again shake Vladimir Putin's hand, remember that that hand is soaked in blood. The other extreme is the narrative of so-called collective guilt that seeks to blame all Russian citizens, every single one, for the crimes of the unelected regime in the Kremlin. Oh, you know those Russians, they're all imperialists, they're all genetic slaves, they're incompatible with democracy. Let's just cancel and isolate all of them. Needless to say, it is equally unacceptable in the 21st century to use national stereotypes and to discriminate against people solely on the basis of their citizenship. There has to be a third way. While standing firm against Putin's dictatorship, I believe the EU should continue an active dialogue with that part of Russian society, that large part of Russian society, which believes in a peaceful, democratic, European future for our country. It is important to fight for the release of political prisoners, to back independent Russian language media that counters Kremlin propaganda narratives, to support organizations that work with anti-war and pro-democracy Russians both inside and outside the country. It is all the more important to do that today because the United States of America, under its current leadership, is doing the exact opposite. It is important to institutionalize this dialogue between the European Union and Russian democratic forces, perhaps in the framework of the EU-Russia Parliamentary Cooperation Committee. And most important of all, I believe the EU should find a way to communicate to people in Russia that the free world's fight is not with them, but with a dictatorship that misrules them, and that a future democratic Russia will have its rightful place in Europe and in the world. It is also very important to have a roadmap for the day after Putin. History tells us that major political changes in Russia come suddenly, like this. Both the Tsarist regime and the communist system collapsed in 3 days, literally speaking, not a metaphor. The next time will be no different, and we must be ready to seize that moment and not to squander the opportunity the way it was squandered in the 1990s. What happens in Russia affects everyone. For as long as our country has a regime that is repressive towards its own people, it will always be aggressive towards its neighbors. The only way to ensure long-lasting peace, security, and stability on the European continent, the only way to get to that Europe whole, free, and at peace, is through a democratic Russia. I have no doubt that day will come. Let's work together to bring it closer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vladimir Kara-Murza. And now the floor goes to Mr. Ilya Yashin. Please, floor is yours.
Уважаемые депутаты,
Dear MEPs, colleagues, friends, first of all, I would like to thank all of you who organized these hearings and for the possibility for the representatives of the Russian independent democratic representation to talk to you, to appeal to you. And I would like to get back to the words of Yulia Navalnaya, which I believe are a key thesis for our work. I believe that, just like my colleagues, that the guarantees of the existence of free democratic Europe is peaceful, democratic, free Russia, not appeasing the aggressor, but the changes that should take place inside Russia on the political, mental, cultural level. Russia should understand that it's an integral part of Europe, and our common goal is the Russia that the democratic opposition is fighting for. And we are paying a high price. We're losing years of our lives, we're losing our relatives, our friends, and we'll continue this this war. For the it's my third day in Brussels, and yesterday and the day before yesterday, Vladimir Yulia had a lot of meetings with MEPs and representatives of the European Commission, and the same question was asked. How can we help the anti-war democratic movement in Russia? And I must say that each of the three of us understands very clearly that nobody will do our job, because creating a democratic Russia is our responsibility. We understand that you're not going to build democracy in our country, in our place. But if you want to help the pro-democratic movement in Russia, please save Ukraine from Putin. And this you can do. Saving Ukraine from Putin coincides with our common interests, because if you give Ukraine, that is part of Europe, to Putin, this will be a blow to our movement. His victory in Ukraine will strengthen his regime and make it more angry, more aggressive, and it will be a blow to the democratic movement of our compatriots who are working for the democratic future of Russia. But it will create an additional danger for Europe, because stimulating the aggression will lead to Putin moving further. He won't be satisfied with that, with just having Ukraine. I would like to welcome the beginning of this dialogue. As Yulia mentioned, it should have started earlier, but it shouldn't be limited to just speaking. It should become a systemic dialogue, and it's very important that we should have an institutional dialogue. It seems to me very important that we should start exchanging opinions, should start working together on an institutional level. And the most important thing is that we already have a common vision of the future and understand of it. And I believe that such cooperation will be of great use also to both to the democratic movement in Russia, but also to the democratic movements in Europe. And I see that you are striving to understand Russia, but nobody understands Russia better than us. Nobody understands Russia in Europe better than our Russian democratic forces in Europe. We were born there, we lived there, we spent time in Russian prisons, we won elections, in Russian elections, and we can be useful in this struggle, in this fight, and we would like to fight together for our common goals. And on a different note, of course, I have to mention our people who are still in Putin's prisons, that are victims and that are hostages, that are being tortured in prisons. And I understand that the chance for them to be freed have decreased because of the changed geopolitical situation. I'm not going to dwell on that, but I would like to draw attention to the so-called memorandum that Mr. Medinsky brought to Istanbul for the negotiations with Ukraine. It looks like an ultimatum, and all provisions, almost all of its provisions, are unacceptable. But there is one provision that I would like to draw attention to, dear MEPs. The memorandum that has, of course, been prepared by Mr. Putin and his closest entourage. It contains one important point to declare a mutual amnesty of political prisoners both in Russia and Ukraine. So, for the first time, Putin admitted that there are political prisoners in Russia. For the first time, it's on paper, black on white. And I believe that we should start working with this provision, start our work from this provision, and to do everything to give practical implementation to this provision. Of course, there is no guarantee that the Istanbul dialogue will lead to the ceasefire, to stop the war, but this could save several people, several hundred people, several thousands of people that are still in prisons. And it's very important not to limit our understanding of political prisoners in Russia by the people who have a Ukrainian passport or have cooperated with Ukraine. No, it should be all Russian citizens that ended up in prison because their conscience didn't allow them to remain silent, who criticized the invasion of Ukraine, and these people, our allies, they are saving the honor of our country, and we should do all we can to free them from prisons. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ilya Yashin. Thank you all our guest speakers. And now we proceed with the interventions of the members of this House. And as there are many of us who want to take floor, then the time limit of each intervention will be 1 minute. And we start with coordinators. And Michael Gahler, please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and a warm welcome here. Here I am, in the middle. A warm welcome. You're always welcome in this House of European Democracy, and it's good that you are active and vocal and to represent the Russian Democrats. And it doesn't matter how many you are, it is the principle to show that Russian Democrats exist and that they are fighting for a different Russia. And I'm grateful that you, Mr. Yashin, it was you explicitly who said it needs a kind of defeat of Russia. Russia must not win in Ukraine. So my question is, how do you feel, to what extent does it require a defeat of Russia to make a change possible? And do the current successes be destroying parts of the strategic fleet and also this the show that they could hit the Kerch Bridge, does that set something in motion in thinking amongst certain circles inside Russia to perhaps take another stance? Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Raza Yuknevichene, please.
Thank you. I will speak Russian. Дорогие мои друзья.
Dear friends, you know my opinion. I am of the minority that believes that Russians are not genetic imperialists, and I believe in a good future for Russia. What I was awaiting was what Ilya Yashin said, that the best help for Russia is help for Ukraine. Thank you. And being on your side, I will also raise some critical points. I wanted to clarify, this is not the first dialogue. In 2023, all of the opposition forces were here in the parliament. Unfortunately, some of the followers of Navalny declined. I'm happy that you're here now. Yes, of course, I agree that we need to support those citizens of Russia who oppose the regime, but we need a united front. And one of the problems is that the Western capitals are afraid of Putin's defeat because they do not believe that Russia can be different. It is also in your interest. So the very fact that the Russian opposition doesn't have a united front is a victory for Putin. Another problem for Russian opposition is that Ukraine does not believe that Russia can be different. And your relationships with the Ukrainian political community is bad, I would say. And so my question, what are you doing? What are you trying to do for Ukraine to believe, to start trusting you, the political elite and the public? We need a united front.
Sanchez Amor, please, floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Chair. I'm using Spanish, as I always do, but in this case, in honor of Vladimir, and he knows why. Gracias por su labor, gracias por...
Thank you very much for your work and your resilience, your personal resilience. You had disappeared from our agenda. Ms. Navalnaya is quite right that we never had spoken this much about Russia and this little about the Russians. This is an event today which should have taken place many days, months ago, as you said. Now, what is going to happen after the war? Well, we're probably going to concentrate on rebuilding Ukraine. The temptation, though, is to leave Russia off the agenda. Put yourselves in the psychological situation after the war. The temptation, as Vladimir Kara-Murza was saying, is that we say, there's nothing we can do about the Russians. Throughout history, they've gone from one authoritarian regime to the next. There's nothing we can do about that. I don't want us to fall into that temptation. I'd like to ask, to what extent has support for Putin changed over the months? It's not easy for us to read the situation about disagreement in the situation in society. I wonder whether you can answer that question.
Thank you. And next speaker is Francisco Assis. Please, floor is yours.
Muito obrigado, Sr. Presidente. É muito grato e muito interessante ouvir hoje aqui a língua russa no Parlamento Europeu com pronúncia.
Yes, well, thank you. I hear Russian is being spoken, but Russian with a democratic dimension. Sometimes we forget this other dimension of Russia. And in these sinister times which we're living through, given the way Russia is being administered by Putin, and of course then we had the dictatorship which the Russians had to put up with for so many decades, we forget that there is another Russia which is turned towards Europe, and there's the marvelous Russian culture and art, and your voice is a voice of a free and democratic Russia, a type of Russia which wants to play a different role among nations, and it wants to be part of Europe. And I would like to underline the importance of your presence here today. Secondly, I'd like to know what we can do to help you to promote human rights, given the dramatic situation which Russia is undergoing at the moment. Thank you.
And next speaker is Mr. Sebastian Tynkkynen. Please, floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mrs. Navalnaya, Mr. Kara-Murza, and Mr. Yashin for being here today. In our speeches, in our statements on the stages of Europe, many of us in this room constantly warn about the threat of Vladimir Putin and his dictatorial regime. You our dear guests have had to feel it in your guts what this regime and Putin is all about. Mr. Yashin and Mr. Kara-Murza, this is the same person who had you both imprisoned. Mrs. Navalnaya, this is the same person who is responsible for your husband's death. None of you need to hear these warnings about Putin. However, some politicians in Europe want to be more diplomatic towards Putin, be softer, accept his regime, and live with it. Dear guests, I would like to ask you, what is your message to these European politicians who say we need peace and diplomacy with Putin and we cannot support arms trade by sending weapons to Ukraine? Thank you.
Thank you. And next speaker is Arkadiusz Mularczyk, please. Floor is yours.
Dziękuję bardzo. Działania rosyjskiej...
Well, thank you very much. Your work, your actions deserve full support because you risk your life opposing Putin's regime. You disclose war crimes. You fight for a free democratic Russia. But we shouldn't harbor any delusions. Changing Russia will not mean changing the imperialist mindset of a lot of Russians. We know this in Poland because Poland has been the victim of Russian imperialism for a number of centuries now, irrespective of who is at the helm of Russia. So we are, of course, in favor of Russia removing its troops from Ukraine and facing its responsibility. But now Russia has imposed 17 different sanctions upon Russia. What are the effects of such sanctions? Do you think it is possible to extend the catalogue of sanctions? Do you think they will force Putin to come to the negotiating table? Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Bernard Guetta. Please, floor is yours.
Vous le disiez, Madame.
Ms. Navalnaya, you were saying quite rightly that very little time ago the Russian opposition in the European Union and even in our parliament was reflected by scepticism and sympathy. We did not believe in you. We still believed that Russians don't like democracy. We forgot about the dissidents and the frenetic joy with which Russians grasped the sudden freedom offered by Mikhail Gorbachev. If things have changed now, it's because we finally understood that Vladimir Putin will not win this war, that he will exhaust power, he will exhaust Russia, and that soon we will be able to rebuild our common continent, our common house with a democratic Russia. You said that you're working on new ideas for the Russia of tomorrow. You need to know that we are impatient to hear your proposals for the future architecture for our common continent, and we are keen to debate all of that here with you. Now I'm not addressing our guests, but ourselves, the members of our committee. Mr. Yashin has just told us that our friends in the Russian opposition hope that there will be an exchange of political prisoners between Russia and Ukraine, and that will be a step towards a more democratic Russia. These are women and men who have protested against Putin's war of aggression. These women and men have taken the side of freedom against their own government, exactly like the German Democrats, Willy Brandt and others who heroically stood up against Nazism. So I would like to call upon you, colleagues, to take the initiative so that we, the Parliament of the European Union, can take the initiative to be a resistance so that those political prisoners can be removed from jail, and we can welcome them and applaud them. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Sergei Lagodinsky. Please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And friends, it's great to see you here. I remember the Munich Security Conference 2023. You, Yulia, and myself were on the panel then, and I said one thing that I kept repeating ever since. We have strategic interest of the European Union in three things. Number one, that Ukraine prevails. Number two, that we integrate Ukraine into Europe. And number three, that Alexei Navalny survives. Number three is no more feasible, but there are many people who are a collective, Alexei Navalny, and who are ready to go to prisons and to die and to be sick and to suffer for their principles and for their support for Ukraine. And this is a point that is very visible here in your testimonies. And the one point that I hear from your testimonies is there is no either or. There is no either support for Ukraine or support for Russian anti-Putin and anti-war activists. There is no either dying in penal colony or opposing war. There is no either imprisonment or protesting against war. There is no either being against Putin or being against aggression. It is one and the same. You are one and the same. And when we're talking about collective guilt, there is no collective guilt, but there is a collective responsibility. And I think you are facing and you're taking this responsibility by your actions. And we have to support you. We need to have a strategy vis-à-vis Russia. We discussed this in some of bilateral meetings when we discussed. And this strategy must have three components: support for Ukraine and mutual deterrence vis-à-vis Moscow, clear opposition to Putin, and yes, support for free Russian civil society. And it's not just talking. We need to, first of all, actively recognize and engage with democratic alternatives. This parliament was very courageous when we said we do not recognize Putin. So now let's do the second step and start recognizing the other face of anti-Putin Russian. Number two, a structured and long-term support. It's about money and funding for various media. It's about mobility. It's about security. And what we discussed 2 days ago, also about recognition of political refugees who are looking for a status and legal certainty here in Europe. And number three, it is about accountability. It's about the crimes committed by Russia's citizens and Russia's leadership, and they have to be brought to account and to courts for murdering Ukrainians, but also for murdering Alexei Navalny and many others. And I think this is the foundation for our support and where we all meet, and we should continue in this direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now we heard comments and interventions of our AFET and DROA coordinators, and now we proceed with AFET standing rapporteur for Russia. Sandra Kalniete, please, floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. For me, I lived under the dictatorship, and for me, this repetition of history is extremely depressing. And I also would like to express my deepest respect for the leaders of Russian opposition. And now I will speak in Latvian.
The representatives of the Russian opposition that live in the free world now is the only credible bridge that reaches the society in Russia, the society that does not accept Putin's regime. And they are the future of Russia. And therefore, the European Union has to support the Russian opposition with financing. We have to support the media of the opposition, the non-governmental organizations of this part, because it is they that can reach society in Russia. And it is in the interests of Europe. It is in our interests for Putin's regime to be broken, and for Russia to become a democratic country. I also have
you have a goal to prepare the fall of Putin's regime. But it's not the only goal. The obligation is that after the fall of the regime, you, the supporters of democracy, leaders, that you are able not to repeat these mistakes which created the basis for dictatorship to return. democracy in its beginning is very fragile. We know by our own experience in Baltic states. That's why it is very important to strengthen it, and the tool to strengthen it is to be united. And all the rest comes after. When it's strong, then you can have to create different fractions and discuss your positions, and etc. I think that is very important, that after the fall of the regime, you are ready to sustain the building of democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we still have some members who want to take floor. Please, Tobias Kramer, floor is yours.
Yes, Mrs. Navalnaya, Mr. Kara-Murza, Mr. Yashin, I want to really thank you for your courage, and I thank you as a German whose ancestors were involved in the resistance against their own oppressive and totalitarian regime, and who knows the courage it takes to speak truth to tyranny, to uphold human values in the face of barbarism, and of showing to the world that behind the iron bars of dictators, there is another society, and there are people who yearn for freedom, and you are showing this courage, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. Because the fight you are fighting is not just for freedom for the Russian people, but for freedom and peace in Europe, because we also know from history that dictators, barbarism doesn't stop in their countries. Putin has started killing and imprisoning opponents in the streets of Moscow. Now he is assassinating people in the streets of Berlin. Putin has started disinformation and oppressing the media in Russia. Now we see disinformation in our own media coming from Russia. Putin has been rigging votes in Russia. Now he's rigging votes in Moldova. It is your courage that can stop that, and it is your courage that shows that to stop tyrants, it is not appeasement, it is strength. Putin isn't scared of NATO. Putin isn't scared of the EU. Putin is scared of Russians who fight for freedom. Putin is scared of you. So I just want to ask you to keep scaring him. And maybe also, and this is my question, when you talk to our American friends, of talking to them and asking them how they see the idea of strength against tyranny and their ideas of diplomacy. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Helmut Brandstätter, please.
Here we go. Thank you, Chair. Dear Yulia, dear Vladimir, dear Ilya. First of all, I want to express my respect for your incredible courage, and I'm deeply moved about everything you said. Thank you, Yulia. You said, let's do something. It's not enough to talk, and that's very good. Let's do something. You said it doesn't make sense that we support Voice of America. We should do something European. That is my question. How do you see it? Should we build up a common media like Voice of Free Russia? What can we do together that people get information? I talked to Vladimir about it yesterday, that there are a lot of people already in Russia who have more information, who would be open for real information. So I really want to know what can we do together to get this true information. There's a lot of disinformation from Russia on our side, so let's go back to them and give them information. And then my colleague Dan Barna, he had to leave, but he would be interested, and his question would be, how would, in your perspective, a peace with Ukraine, how would it look like? How would you see that the peace with Ukraine would look like? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ruth Firemnich, please.
Vielen Dank. Ich freue mich sehr über die Gelegenheit. Thank you. I'm delighted to have an opportunity for dialogue and ask questions. I'd be interested to hear whether you share the view of Kaja Kallas from the EU that Russia needs to be defeated. And I'd also be interested to hear your views about Crimea. Do you believe that Crimea is part of Ukraine? And I'd like to hear your views on the attacks last weekend in Russia on bridges. To what extent do you see them as terrorist attacks? And finally, I'd be interested to hear who is financing your work and your newly founded broadcasting system. And we hear that the opposition is fragmented. So could you tell me what the main points of conflict among yourselves are? Thank you.
Gregos Brown, please. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I want to distance myself from your war rhetorics, no matter how tragic might your ladies and gentlemen experiences be. This is the European Parliament, and I don't want to be a part of your anti-Russian crusade. I don't think it is our role here to change anybody else's mentality or governments. And I can hear a very clear call to change somebody else's presidents and governments, regimes. And I think the European Parliament is in no position to criticize everybody around, because there are people imprisoned in Europe for what they spoke, what they wrote. You don't know that, sir? You don't know that over 3,000 people were imprisoned in Britain for some Facebook remarks critical of the regime and not conforming to the political correctness. So you gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, are in no position to preach democracy to everybody else. Let's concentrate on normalization, not escalation. Let's talk peace, not war.
You talk peace with a war criminal? This is crazy.
Yeah, well,
Mr. Chairman, can you please instruct the gentleman here?
Yes, and I also instructed that 1 minute is every speech. So
he's interrupting.
Yeah, but well, point taken.
Okay.
Thank you very much. We proceed with other.
So, my country, my nation, me personally, we are not going to your war. Thank you very much.
Well, next speaker is Isabel Wisseler-Lima, please. 1 minute.
Thank you so much. I only wanted to take the floor because of what has been said lately. I was very sorry not to be here all the time, but I had to go to vote, so that was the only reason why I wasn't sitting here. I very much admire your courage. I saw you when you came, when your husband was killed. After your husband was killed, I followed when you were in prison, Mr. Kara-Murza, and I really have to say that I am still, when I say this, I represent, I think, a big majority in this parliament and also of the people in our European Union. And the defense of democracy is what we have to put in first place. And when we see what happens in your country, unfortunately, I think everyone should know it. I'm really always ashamed when I hear people say that, yes, our democracy are not perfect. It's not perfect, clearly not, but they don't know what they say when they say that they get in prison for saying something. They should be in countries where it is like that when they say things like that, to know what they are saying. Thank you so much for what you are doing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yana Toom, please.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm sorry for not being here in between. I had a vote in another committee, and I didn't plan to ask something, but I also was triggered with this remark. I just want to assure you that you definitely have the support of, 99% of this parliament, and we are with you, and I'm very glad finally to see united democratic Russian opposition speaking on the name of Russians in the world, and I really believe that Europe is doing grave mistake pushing away Russian citizens based on their passport or their nationality. I believe that Europe is wise enough to learn from our own mistakes, and it's very good that you came here with this signal, and you definitely can rely on our support. Thank you.
Thank you. And final statement from members of this House, Mr. Jan Farski, please.
Thank you. I just want to thank you for your incredible courage. I'm from the Czech Republic, so we have an experience with Russian aggression, and we know what Russian occupants can do to a country. And looking at your work, at your incredible things you do, you are a hope for us, because until there's a democracy in Russia, Russia will be a threat for the whole Europe. So thank you for what you are doing for us.
Thank you very much. And now I give the floor back to our guest speakers for their final replies and comments and for concluding remarks. Please, Mrs. Navalnaya.
I don't know if to speak English or Russian. What's better? I think that if you don't mind, I'll answer in Russian, because I saw that a lot of people hear me without hear. It means that you know Russian, and I appreciate it very much. Вначале хотела бы сказать...
First of all, I would like to thank you all. Many thanks, because absolute majority of MEPs who spoke started with expressing their support for us, and for us it's of great importance to live in this situation, because most of you mentioned that you've lived under this dictatorship 40 years ago, and at the same time we live under this dictatorship now. This is not just a dictatorship. There is a person who is killing people, who is starting wars, started a war with a neighboring country, Ukraine, and I'm a bit frightened because he'll never stop, and any success will give him time to regroup. If it won't be Ukraine, it will be another country. And I do not want to frighten you. I'm rather courageous, but we all should understand that it's not about a specific war. It's about the fact that while we have dictator Putin in power, nothing will change. And I believe that our main purpose should be not to turn Russia immediately into democracy, but to do everything for Putin to stop being president of Russia as soon as possible. And I believe this will immediately change a lot. And I'm sorry that I have to call him president, because in my many speeches I ask people not to call him president, but I think it's more understandable to most people, because he is not the president of Russia. He's never won in any normal democratic elections. First of all, he was appointed to become a successor, an heir of the previous president, and then he stole. Every time he stole elections, and every time he was tightening he understood that he could never win if he did it honestly. He never participated in any debates. And he's a great example. My husband, who was the strongest opponent of Putin, Putin never let strong pro-democratic parties to participate in elections, or the opponents that could not just win, but even to get to more than 2% of votes. Unfortunately, this works. He learned how to frighten people, and unfortunately, this is going on and on. We are sitting here discussing it, and it seems to me that I, Vladimir, and Ilya are screaming about it, but don't forget about Russia. Russia will not disappear. It's a big country and it's governed by a dictator. And while there is a dictator, neither in Ukraine nor in Europe, there won't be a flourishing society or situation. As for the question of the mistakes of the 90s, I don't think it a question to me, because my organization is often criticized by other friends, allies from their position, that we draw attention to that. I believe that mistakes that were made in 1990s should not be forgotten or repeated, and that at some point in time we haven't done illustration and we haven't destroyed secret services, previously existing secret services, and we did not insist on the renaissance of the society through a short period of time, and I believe that it should not be repeated, and believe that colleagues who are next to me here will agree with me. And there was a question about uniting their position. I think everything is clear there, and laureate and Ilya have never been members of an organization. We represent of the same organization. We represent different movements, different organizations, and I believe that we had always had great dialogue. Then the guys were imprisoned, and I'm happy, very happy that they're next to me now. But we are united opposition. We represent it. Thank you.
Mr. Vladimir Kara-Murza, please, your comments.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank all members for your comments, for your questions, for your kind and warm words. Monsieur Guetta, je veux vous remercier spécifiquement pour
Mr. Guetta, I would like to thank you very much. And thank you for those kind words about our common house. These are words which we don't hear too often. I believe that this was used firstly by Mikhail Gorbachev when he came to France in the 80s, when he became Secretary General. Europe is really our common house. It is our common continent. And I'm absolutely convinced that the only way to make sure that Europe is really free and in democracy, it is necessary to work together for this common house and to achieve this goal. And thank you for everything which you do in order to reach that goal.
To thank the European Parliament, this was a point made by Sergei Lagodinsky, to thank the European Parliament for its overwhelmingly passed resolution last year, officially recognizing Vladimir Putin for who he is, an illegitimate usurper. And I want to add that a similar resolution was passed also last year by the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe that represents 46 countries on this continent. I think it's finally time to call a spade, long past time, frankly, to say that 2 + 2 = 4. And it's time to stop calling Vladimir Putin president. I second what Yulia said a few minutes ago. He's not president, he is a usurper. And not only has he never won a free, fair, and democratic election in his 25 years in power, this is not my personal opinion. If you go on the website of the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which is the gold standard on this continent when it comes to election observation, you will see that they haven't recognized any Russian national elections since the year 2000 as free, fair, or democratic. But even more than that, in his pseudo-legal maneuvers to overturn the constitutional term limit, the so-called обнуление, the cancelling, annulling his previous terms, pretending that they didn't exist, Vladimir Putin broke not only the commitments under international law, but actually Russian laws and the Russian constitution itself. So for the first time, he became illegitimate, not only de facto, which he has been for a long, long time, but also very specifically de jure, from a very legal standpoint. And it was very important that both the European Parliament and the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe have made this point loud and clear. And I would actually just agree with Yulia and urge all of us to stop referring to Vladimir Putin as president, because he is not. And the same goes, of course, for Alexander Lukashenko. I want to thank Standing Rapporteur Sandra Kalniete for her remarks. And I want to associate myself, especially with what you said, Madam Rapporteur, about the importance of not repeating the mistakes of the 1990s the next time there is a window of opportunity in Russia. To my mind, the most important mistake that President Yeltsin and his team made in the 1990s was their inability, or perhaps their unwillingness, to really come to terms with the Soviet past and to really account for and condemn the crimes of the communist regime in the way it was done in your country, in other Baltic states, in Czech Republic, in Poland. And we know that every country that actually successfully transitioned from dictatorship to democracy, not just in Europe, but South Africa after apartheid, Argentina after the military junta, and so on, they went through this necessary process of a public reflection and a public accountability and a state condemnation of all the crimes that had been committed. Because we know that when evil is not publicly accounted for and publicly condemned, it will invariably return. And this is exactly what happened in Russia when in the 1990s there were no illustrations, there were no openings of the archives. The KGB was only renamed as opposed to disbanded. There was never any accountability. And it was very symbolic that one of the first acts of Mr. Putin when he came to the Kremlin was to reinstate the Stalin-era Soviet national anthem, a very powerful symbol of what was to come. Because again, if evil is not publicly accounted for and publicly condemned, it will return, and next time we have to make sure that it never returns again. To the gentleman who's a fan of Mr. Putin, I just want to say that we envy the fact that you're able to sit here in this parliament, freely elected by voters, express your opinions, and not afraid that you'll be poisoned like Alexei Navalny, or shot in the back like Boris Nemtsov on the bridge in front of the Kremlin, or sent to prison like Ilya and I were. I just want to say value these freedoms because this is something that 2 generations now in our country have not been able to enjoy. I'm not just a politician, I'm a historian by education. Back in the Soviet times, people like you who would sort of translate Kremlin propaganda in free countries would be referred to as fellow travelers. I think it's probably time we brought this word back into our political lexicon. And finally, I just want to emphasize what all of my colleagues have said and what many of you, members of the European Parliament, have referred to as well. The importance of making sure that any ceasefire agreement, if one does come over Ukraine, includes a provision to release all the captives of this war. There is a public campaign that has been launched a few months ago, jointly by Ukrainian and Russian human rights NGOs, primarily the Center for Civil Liberties in Ukraine, Center Gramadyanskих Svobod, and Memorial in Russia. And since this campaign has been supported by a whole host of reputable international human rights NGOs, such as Reporters Sans Frontières, Human Rights Watch, Norwegian Helsinki Committee, and many others. And the title of this campaign is very simple: People First. We hear a lot of talk when in these conversations about the coming ceasefire or these negotiations, we hear a lot of talk about sanctions and assets and territories and rare earth minerals and God knows what else. There's not enough talk about people. And this is, after all, the most important thing we have to talk about. There's nothing we can do to bring back the tens of thousands of lives that have been lost because of Putin's war of aggression in Ukraine. But we still can bring back the tens of thousands of lives of people who have become captives and hostages of this war. The prisoners of war, the Ukrainian civilian captives, the abducted Ukrainian children, and yes, Russian political prisoners whose only quote-unquote crime was not to remain silent in the face of this aggression and to speak out against it. And because we know that we cannot count on the current American administration, in fact, it is a guarantee that the current American administration will not do anything of the kind in these negotiations, I think it is very important that the European Union stands up and makes sure that any deal that is made puts people first. Thank you so much once again for your invitation. It is always an honor to be here at the European Parliament, especially meaningful to be back here for the first time since imprisonment. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Ilya Yashin, please.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, I'll apologize out front that I won't be able to answer all the questions that were raised here because we are pressed for time. But I want to make a number of important comments here. And first of all, I would like to comment what was said here by the gentleman who heard the appeals to overthrow the government and the president in another country. I hear the same urges since 2022 from Putin regarding Ukraine. And this is not just a claim. Putin deployed troops in Ukraine so that to overthrow democratically elected president and government in the neighboring independent country. And this war has been going on for almost 3.5 years. So when you criticize the so-called human rights violations in Europe, you seem to overlook a huge elephant in this room, and this elephant is Putin's aggression. And this is not just a joke or some brave words. It's not just an exercise in rhetorics in the European Parliament. You are an EU member Parliament. It's a shame to be a Putinist in 2025. It's a shame to stand for Putin's aggression. It's a shame to be a European and to want to have a dictatorship for your own country. It's a shame. And now I would like to turn to the questions that were raised by some MEPs. In particular, the question whether Russia should lose this war. Should Russia be defeated in this war? Let me share my vision how this war should end. In my view, this war undoubtedly should end when each and every Russian soldier and officer leaves the Ukrainian territory and go back. And I don't consider it a defeat by Russia. I think it will be Putin's defeat. It's not Russia's defeat, because this war itself, this aggression itself, is against the national interests of my country. It's not just an anti-Ukrainian war. It's an anti-Russian war. This war is detrimental to my own country. That's why I'm against this war. That's why I demand on the withdrawal of the Russian troops from the territory of Ukraine. And I have been vocal about it from the very beginning of this war. Both Vladimir and Yulia said the same. We continued saying this when we were behind the bars, and we continue saying this once we have been released. This is our position. We defend our country. We defend our country's interests. That's why we're against Putin. How can we do so that Ukraine could believe us? That was the question. What shall we do so that Ukraine and Ukrainian authorities and Ukrainian politicians could believe us? We don't go extra miles so that they believe us. We say what we think. We were imprisoned for saying the truth, because we were speaking the truth about the war in Ukraine. I was imprisoned, and I spent 25 months in prison because in my YouTube channel, I said about the war crimes in Bucha. And when I was put in prison, I was not silent. I continued saying the same, both in court and in the interviews when I was in prison. I still addressed my audience, and I continue saying this. And here at the European Parliament, I would like to take this opportunity to repeat that we are not enemies to Ukraine. We wish good for Ukraine. We want Ukraine to sustain its independence and sovereignty and overcome this huge, terrible trial. We want good for Ukraine. And let me also know that recently President Zelensky mentioned that he was ready to launch a dialogue with the Russian opposition. Here I would like to reiterate in front of you that we stand ready for this dialogue. We would be very much interested in this dialogue. And should the representatives of the members of the European Parliament could become a mediator in this dialogue, we would be very grateful. We want to start this dialogue with Ukraine, because a dialogue with Putin's representatives doesn't work. But okay, let's explore some alternative routes. So what shall we say to the politicians who want to establish diplomatic relations with Putin and who want to re-establish the connections with the Kremlin? Well, I think it's obvious. We should remind those politicians, those European politicians, some history lessons. Unlike Vladimir, I'm not a historian, but I have had my history lessons. So let me remind you a historical phenomenon, the appeasement of an aggressor. Let's not forget that when you appease an aggressor, it doesn't result in peace. It's just a stimuli for a new war, a new aggression. It's really important to understand that Vladimir Putin has a different mentality, political mentality in Europe. It's normal when politicians look for a compromise and concessions. This is part of a pan-European political culture. Vladimir Putin is a person of a different political culture. Any concession, any compromise is viewed by him as a weakness, as an excuse to hit even harder, to exert pressure. Vladimir Putin understands only the language of strength and force. So if we want to save Europe, if we want to save Russia as a democratic state, we need to show our strength. Europe has everything to resist Putin, to win Putin's aggression. Europe has enough resources. Europe has enough people. Europe has enough everything. It's just lacking the will and unity. To this end, we need to find the will and unity. And here I would like to remind and note again that I'm very grateful for this dialogue. And I'm very happy that this is not just a formal meeting where people just shake hands, have a picture, a Kodak moment, and that's it. No, I think we've had a really frank, open, straight dialogue, not always pleasant, but it's been very important, and I would very much like to continue this dialogue. And I urge you, dear colleagues, dear friends, it's in our common interest to institutionalize this dialogue and to make it systemic and permanent. It's in our common interest. Thank you very much to you all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yashin. And now we will wrap up our meeting with also short comments from European Union Russian Parliamentary Cooperation Committee Chairman Ville Niinistö and Chair of DROA, Mr. Saturi. Mr. Niinistö, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, dear guests, for your very elaborate and inspiring speeches today. We are very thankful that you are here, and on behalf of the Delegation on Relations with Russia, I want to also take on board the policy recommendations you made for EU on funding free media in Russia or by Russians, and then also the situation of political prisoners. And then finally, the proposal made by Mr. Kara-Murza and also reflected by Mr. Yashin, and also for Ms. Navalnaya. We would be very interested from the side of the delegation to look forward at creating a more permanent and structured cooperation with the pro-democratic forces in Russia. So this is something that we will work on, and I will work personally on as chair of the delegation. So this is just a start for our dialogue for a more democratic future for Russia. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Saturi, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I already stated my admiration for our guests, for their support and courage, but I was scandalized like others by some of the words, and I will conclude by saying in the face of war, we will always choose peace. Faced with repression, we will always respond with law. Faced with fear, we will always respond with courage and solidarity. And faced with collaboration and treachery, we will support the Russian opposition. We will go right down to the wire until the EU and Russia are together in a common home with their peoples living in peace together in this continent like elsewhere in the world.
So, dear colleagues, dear guests, and let me conclude by sincerely thanking our distinguished speakers for their inspiring testimonies and tireless dedication to democracy and freedom in Russia. Rest assured, we remain vigilant to developments in Russia and are committed to providing increased support and solidarity to those brave individuals and groups fighting for democratic change. And of course, our cooperation, our dialogue must continue also between you and the European Parliament and other European Union institutions. Once again, thank you very much. Wish you all the best, and we all, of course, like to see free and democratic Europe, including Russia. Thank you. So our meeting has been finished, and next time we will meet on the 23rd of June. Thank you.